Hey, what's up? It's Annika and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, then to catch you up, I'm working on paying off over $229,000 in debt. I do monthly budget videos. I always keep you all updated with my finances, my debt payoff updates, my wins, I guess, and pretty much everything along the way. So if you're not, make sure to go ahead and subscribe to my channel. So let's just get right into it. In this video, I'll be talking about how I use my emergency fund, have it set aside, how I kind of don't use it, but I am using it, and it's just kind of like a weird situation, but I'm gonna talk about it. So first things first, I am on Dave Ramsey's 7 baby step plan to gaining financial freedom, and I am currently taking his course, Financial Peace University, and was actually gifted that by Ramsey Plus. And I actually did a sponsored video with them for my February budget with me video. So that's just a little backstory behind that. I am on baby step 2, obviously working on paying off my debt. And baby step 1 is to have $1,000 saved in your emergency fund. So I do have that saved up in a separate savings account with my bank. So it's not just kind of sitting in my checking account, it's actually separate. And I literally labeled it my emergency fund. And it has exactly $1,000 in it. I think it has like a couple cents in there now just because of like the like 0.0 whatever interest, and it's like keep the change, transfers. It's just, yeah, but basically it's exactly $1,000. For me, I think it's super important to have your money separated out, just because I know if it's sitting in my checking account, like, yes, I can see like that emergency amount in there, but it's less likely to be pulled from as easily, whereas if it's in a separate savings account, I have to actually go and transfer that to my checking account in order to use it. Basically, if you didn't see my last video, I was puppy scammed, and I'll go ahead and link that above here, and I lost a lot of money. I paid through Zelle, which is not recommended, never pay through Zelle. I filed claims with my bank and everything as soon as it happened, but that could take 10 to 45 days to even process, and then 90 days to get like a final result from it. And since it was through Zelle, it's very unlikely that I could get any of that money back. So that's just a big downer for me. It sucks. That's a lot of money lost, and now I have to account for in my budget. That just goes nowhere, and it's really sad. So basically, to cover that up, I didn't make a snowball payment towards my debt this month. I know in my March budget with me video, I actually had a bigger amount, I think something about like over $3,000 going towards my debt, when normally my required monthly payment minimum is actually like around $1,400. So I was making a very significant snowball payment towards my debt, but I just had to kind of shift that around to now cover my butt, basically, so I don't have like overdrafts or having to put things on credit cards and have them kind of stack up and put me back in a mess where I was at the beginning of all this. But I will say, when it comes to things like that, obviously not being scammed, but things that come up during the month that I did not account for in my budget, I do budget by the entire month. I don't go paycheck by paycheck because I've had a relatively stable income and every paycheck is pretty much the same, so I can gauge what I'm going to need for the entire month before the month even starts, which is very nice. And then anything extra is just extra, and then it's added in after, and I can either add that to my snowball or wherever I need it at that point. But in past months, I have been bad where I literally overspend in my budget and I steal from next month's budget. So that kind of brings in the idea of my emergency fund, where I don't think of it as an emergency fund per se, because I'm not literally pulling money out of my separate savings account to put into my checking account to cover my butt. I do have a little bit of a buffer in my checking account because I'm very, very bad at very simple number calculations, and I just want to be covered for things that like my auto debit and I don't know, just crazy things that come up and mistakes that I make. For example, if I overspend in a month, I will actually add a category in my budget saying like borrowed from the next month, and then I'll skip ahead to the next month's budget, and then I will say covering last month and have the amount that I overspent, so that way it balances out in the budget and I just have to account for that in next month's budget. So technically that is kind of like borrowing from myself, and like if I were to pull from emergency fund, that is like literally spending money that I have set aside, if that makes sense. This is probably confusing you by the way I'm explaining this. Instead of literally pulling from my emergency fund, I'm borrowing from next month, which is almost equivalent to spending next month's money, because when you do pull from your emergency fund and you dwindle, let's say like $200 or whatever it is, then the next month I'm gonna stop like all snowball payments until I can replenish that $200 from my emergency fund and put that back. So instead of doing the whole transferring it from account to account and then having to like mentally be like, oh, I have to replenish my emergency fund, I use it as like a borrowing mentality, which is terrible, because going over budget on things that aren't necessarily an emergency, that don't really count as emergency, and wouldn't necessarily be approved by Mr. Dave Ramsey himself to use emergency money on, is bad. So I have a terrible habit of doing this. It's only happened a couple of months. Like I know I did it like last June, and I think in January I did it really bad when I actually went to Orlando and overspent a lot. So I had to borrow a lot from February, and now here we are in March. I got scammed. I lost a lot of money. And in my puppy scam video, I mentioned that I didn't have to pull from my emergency fund, but I technically am. So I'm pulling from April's budget to cover my March expenses because I lost out on a lot of money. So that might have been very confusing, but again, I kind of just want to talk this through with you all so that you can learn from my mistakes and not do what I do, and come along with me on my journey. Only spend money that you have, don't spend that money that you don't have. And I really need to be better about this, and I'm forcing myself to share it with you. But again, March was a different situation because that was pretty much an emergency. Like I would consider it an emergency, and I would use my emergency fund on the expenses that I lost out on, because that is just like money I was scammed out of, which sucks majorly. But that's why it's there. It's there to cover me. It is my money that I set aside for purposes like this, and while I'm not literally pulling from my actual emergency fund, I am borrowing from April, so it technically kind of is. And that's how I pretty much format that. If I did need a large amount, like I needed like the full $1,000 emergency, then obviously I would have to pull that from my emergency fund and transfer it from my savings to my checking account and then have that for me. But since I usually only go over like smaller amounts, it is easier to borrow from next month, which is a terrible habit that I need to seriously break. But let me know how you utilize your emergency fund. I really wanted to make a video on this because I feel like emergency funds vary so much and people don't really talk about them too much. At least I haven't seen. I know talking within the kind of debt payoff community that, and the people that like are following Dave Ramsey's baby steps and do fulfill baby step 1, saving $1,000, or sometimes it's more depending on that person's situation. But for me, it just stresses me out when I have too low of a balance in my checking account. So I do kind of have a little bit of a buffer, which technically I could put in my separate emergency fund savings account. But again, when things pop up like they did for me this past month, I had that buffer in my checking account, so it didn't go into like overdraft and like negatives. So, but let me know what you guys do. Like if you have emergencies pop up, like do you keep that in your checking account? Do you transfer immediately, or do you like pull directly from your savings, or do you like have cash? And like how are y'all dealing with that? Because I would love to know. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this little chat. If you're not already, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and follow along on my debt-free journey, as well as I have a very, very, very exciting video coming up. That's actually not related to money so much, but you'll see. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.